So imagine you are the commercial manager on a multi-billion-dollar rail project over in the UAE.
Oh, man. High stakes right out of the gate.
Right. I mean, the desert sun is just beating down. You've got literally thousands of workers mobilized, and your supply chain is, stretched across 3 different continents.
And it takes months just to get to that point to finally hit your stride.
Exactly. You are finally hitting your stride. And then, just completely out of nowhere, you get an email.
The dreaded Friday afternoon email.
Oh, you know it.
Yeah.
The employer has basically decided to omit a massive portion of your scope, like maybe the entire signaling system or just a huge stretch of track.
Wow. Just stripped right out of the contract.
Yeah, and the kicker is they only did it to hand it to a cheaper contractor who just set up shop right down the road.
Yeah, that's rough.
So what do? Do you just accept it? Like, do you take the massive financial hit and try to resequence your entire baseline program? Or do you actually fight back?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it?
Because if you do fight back, I mean, what exactly is your ammunition? You aren't just looking at, a simple loss of revenue here.
No, absolutely not. You're looking at completely unabsorbed overheads.
Right. Unabsorbed overheads, disrupted critical paths, and a potential cascade of disputes that could, honestly, last for a decade.
It is the ultimate commercial nightmare. I mean, it really is. And yet it happens far more often than anyone outside this industry would ever believe.
Oh, for sure. Which is exactly why we are doing this today.
The stakes in that exact moment are just astronomical. You basically have to synthesize the rigid text of your contract with the incredibly messy, volatile reality of a live project.
Because what a contract says in black and white often looks very, very different when you're staring down aggressive, bespoke conditions, right?
Yeah.
Especially in jurisdictions like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or Australia.
Exactly. And the goal today is to really cut through all that noise.
Yes, and establish right now that this deep dive is an advanced, expert-level masterclass for senior commercial professionals.
We are skipping the basics today.
We are. We assume you already know what a BOQ is, or an EOT. We're jumping straight into forensic claims, strategic risk allocation, and dispute resolution across global mega projects.
Which is where the real battles are fought.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Why?
Because I think we need to look at the entire ecosystem of these contracts.
We do. Everything is connected.
And the biggest pressure point in that ecosystem, like the one causing the most immediate pain on international schedules right now, is time.
Time is money. It always comes back to time.
Always. So why do major infrastructure projects, particularly in the GCC, right? Like we're talking colossal airports, deep water ports, commercial towers, why do they continuously experience these crippling multi-year delays?
Well, it's a huge issue.
Because we are way past the excuse of, oh, the ground conditions were surprising. There is a systemic failure happening here.
There absolutely is a systemic failure. And honestly, it originates long, long before the first shovel ever hits the dirt.
You mean back at the tenders?
Yes. When we look at these persistent delays in the GCC and other, rapidly developing markets, it's really an ecosystem of compounded risks.
Right.
You have these projects of just unprecedented scale and complexity, and they are fast-tracked to the point where design maturity at the tender stage is, frankly, woefully inadequate.
Which means you are basically pricing a moving target.
Exactly. You're pricing a moving target, and then you pair that incredibly immature design with highly fragmented supply chains, extreme climate constraints, and this cultural preference for bespoke contracts.
Wow, the bespoke contracts, where they just push nearly all the risk onto the contractor.
Every single ounce of it. So when the design inevitably changes because, it was only 40% complete at tender, the machinery of the contract just cannot process the change fast enough.
The engineer's instructions lag behind, right?
Always. The instructions lag, the variations get bitterly disputed, and suddenly your baseline program is basically a work of fiction.
It's just a nice piece of wall art at that point.
Pretty much, yeah.
And when the baseline program becomes fiction, it seems like everyone just starts looking for a structural firewall to hide behind.
They absolutely do.
Which brings us to the ultimate firewall, doesn't it? Force majeure.
Ah, yes. The big one.
Because we see a lot of regional crises now. Geopolitical shifts, blockades, massive global shipping bottlenecks.
It's been a very volatile few years.
And I've always noticed that contractors love to throw around the term force majeure the literal second a material shipment gets delayed.
Like a reflex.
Right. But force majeure isn't a parachute, it's a firewall. I mean, it might stop the fire of liquidated damages from burning down your company, but it doesn't rebuild the rooms you've already lost.
That is a fantastic way to look at it.
So under FIDIC, how does a regional GCC crisis actually activate a contractor's rights without getting just, completely thrown out by an arbitration panel?
Well, this raises an important question about the burden of proof and, frankly, the sophistication of modern delay analysis, because tribunals are completely merciless on this point.
I can imagine. They don't just take your word for it.
Not at all. Let's actually look at the evolution of the standard forms here. If you look at the old FIDIC 1999 red or yellow book, Clause 19 deals with force majeure.
Right, the classic definition.
Exactly. It defines it as an exceptional event that is beyond a party's control, something they couldn't reasonably have provided against, couldn't avoid, and crucially wasn't caused by the other party.
But then FIDI completely changed gears in 2017, didn't they? They dropped the term force majeure entirely.
They did. They renamed Clause 18 to just exceptional events.
Which honestly was a necessary pivot, I think.
Oh, 100%.
Because force majeure carries so much legal baggage, especially under civil law jurisdictions like the UAE or Qatar.
It really does. The local civil codes are very strict.
Right. The civil code already has very specific and sometimes totally conflicting definitions of what constitutes impossible performance.
Yes, exactly.
So by calling it an exceptional event, FIDIC is basically trying to keep the mechanism purely contractual, right? Just pulling it away from all that statutory ambiguity.
Precisely. It standardizes the interpretation across different borders, but you have to remember, the threshold for activating that structural firewall remains just incredibly high.
So you can't just point to the news and say, look, a crisis.
No, not at all. A general regional crisis, like a sudden inflation spike or some logistical blockade at a major port, that does not automatically grant you an extension of time or any financial relief.
You actually have to do the legwork.
A lot of legwork.
Yeah.
You have to prove strict contractual entitlement, you have to establish undeniable cause and effect, and you must comply with rigorous notice requirements.
The time bar.
Yes. If your contract dictates you must notify the engineer within 14 days of becoming aware of the event, and you submit the notice on day 16.
Just 2 days late.
Even 2 days late, because you were busy fighting literal or metaphorical fires on site, your claim is totally dead on arrival. Tribunals will strictly enforce those condition precedent time bars.
Okay, but I have to push back here for a second.
Go for it.
Isn't force majeure, or I guess exceptional events now, isn't it just becoming a convenient get-out-of-jail-free card for contractors who are already severely behind schedule anyway?
It's definitely attempted often enough.
Because you see it all the time on these mixed-use developments. A contractor's really lagging on their structural concrete pours, right? They're like 6 weeks behind due to their own terrible resource management.
Yeah, poor productivity.
Exactly. And then suddenly a global shipping crisis delays the delivery of their MEP equipment. So they just throw their hands up, declare an exceptional event, and demand a massive extension.
And that is exactly why tribunals and really experienced engineers look right past the headline of a so-called crisis.
They dig into the schedule.
They demand forensic evidence linking that specific event directly to the critical path.
Cause and effect.
Yes. So in your example, if you are claiming an exceptional event delayed your MEP equipment, but a dynamic analysis of your baseline program shows you couldn't have installed that equipment anyway.
Because you haven't even finished the structural frame.
Exactly. That is a fatal flaw in your claim.
Because the exceptional event didn't actually cause the delay to the project completion date?
No.
The contractor's prior inefficiency did. The delay was basically absorbed by the contractor's own negative float.
Exactly right. You must prove cause and effect on the critical path. And honestly, even if you clear that massive hurdle under FIDIC, an exceptional event generally only grants you an extension of time anyway.
Just time, not money.
Mostly just time. You only get cost relief, meaning your prolonged site overheads, if the event falls into very specific, usually man-made categories, like war or terrorism within the country where the site is located.
Wait, really? What if it's a natural disaster?
If it's a natural disaster like an act of God, you might get the time to avoid liquidated damages, but you carry your own financial losses. Yeah. So as a commercial strategy, leaning on force majeure is actually a very weak defensive posture, unless you have absolute bulletproof contemporary records tying the event to the critical path.
Which perfectly illustrates why contractors just bleed money even when they supposedly win an EOT.
They win the battle but lose the war.
Exactly. And I think that brings us right back to the scenario I posed at the very start of this deep dive.
The omitted scope.
Yes. Because if the contractor's bleeding money, the employer is usually panicking about the overall budget at the same time.
Always.
So the employer decides that they're the ones who want to pull a ripcord, and they decide to slash the contractor scope to save some cash. Let's really talk about this cheaper contractor dilemma.
It is one of the most hostile commercial environments you can possibly navigate as a professional.
I always think about it like this, and tell me if this tracks. It's like hiring a premium caterer for a wedding.
Okay, I like this.
You sign the contract, they buy the expensive ingredients, they prep the commercial kitchen, they staff up with waiters.
They've committed their resources.
Yes, and right before the main course is supposed to go out, you just fire them because you found a cheaper food truck parked out on the street.
Brutal.
But, and here is the absolute kicker, you still expect that premium caterer to stick around, clean up the hall, and serve dessert.
Right, you still want the rest of the package.
Exactly. You can't just hollow out the middle of a contract and expect the commercial foundation to hold up. The contractor has priced their site overheads, their risk, and their profit across the entire volume of that work.
Absolutely.
So when the employer pulls this kind of maneuver, what are the GCC contractor's actual rights?
Well, that caterer analogy really eliminates the exact mechanism of the breach here. Because when a contractor prices a lump sum or even a remeasured job, they distribute their head office overheads and their anticipated profit across the total volume and the specific mix of the work.
It's all baked into the rates.
Yes. So if we look at unamended standard forms like the FIDI showbook, the engineer definitely has broad powers to issue variations, and that includes omitting work. Okay. However, there is a hard, explicit contractual boundary. Work cannot be omitted for the purpose of giving it to others. It is fundamentally prohibited.
Right. It's explicitly forbidden in standard FID. But I mean, come on, if you are sitting on a mega project in Riyadh or Doha, standard FIDIC is basically a myth.
Oh, it's entirely a myth.
Government entities and major private developers heavily amend these standard forms. They just strike out that exact protective clause, don't they?
They do, and this is where the commercial risk profile becomes incredibly dangerous for the contractor.
Because they have no protection.
None. In a lot of these bespoke government contracts in the GCC, employers completely rewrite the engineer's powers. They allow omissions at the employer's absolute discretion without any restriction on who executes the work later.
That is terrifying.
It is. From a contractor's perspective, this means your most profitable, high-margin packages can just be stripped away at any moment.
And they leave you with the garbage.
Basically, they leave you with the complex, low-margin, high-risk elements of the build.
So if the bespoke conditions actually allow it, does the contractor just have to swallow the massive loss? Like, what is the counter strategy here?
The counter strategy relies entirely on the governing law of the contract.
Okay.
Because even with those highly aggressive bespoke amendments, you are still operating under a civil code, like the UAE Civil Code or the Qatari Civil Code.
Right. The local law supersedes the contract.
Exactly. And those codes are deeply rooted in Sharia principles of fairness, good faith, and the strict prohibition of unjust enrichment.
Which is a huge factor in the Middle East.
Massive. Article 246 of the UAE Civil Code, for example, actually mandates that contracts must be performed in accordance with good faith.
So it's not just a suggestion.
It's the law. So if an employer arbitrarily omits 30% of your most profitable scope just to save a few bucks, it fundamentally alters the economic balance of the contract.
So you fight them on the valuation.
Exactly. The critical battleground then shifts immediately to the valuation of those omitted works.
Because the contractor is legally entitled to claim for the loss of profit, right? And the unrecovered overheads on the specific work that was taken away.
Yes, absolutely.
Like if I priced 10% profit on a $50 million signaling package and you just take it away to give to a cheaper guy, I want my $5 million.
And you should get it. Standard practice dictates that you deduct the direct cost of the omitted work from the contract sum, sure, but the contractor must be kept whole regarding their fixed overheads and profit.
But employers never want to pay that.
Never. Which almost always leads to direct bidder disputes. The engineer, who is contractually supposed to act impartially in valuing these variations, often finds themselves completely trapped.
Caught in the crossfire.
Yeah. They have an employer demanding total cost savings and a contractor demanding their loss margin.
And this friction over valuation naturally leads us to the actual physical pricing mechanisms in the contract.
It does.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. Let's look at the rigidity of the bill of quantities, the BOQ, versus commercial reality.
Oh, the sacred BOQ.
Right. You have a signed contract with fixed BOQ rates. But we all know international construction is chaotic.
Highly chaotic.
I've always found the absolute reverence that some professionals have for BOQ rates to be a massive commercial trap.
It absolutely can be.
So under what exact mechanisms can these agreed BOQ rates be broken open and changed after contract signing?
Well, the starting position in most traditional contracts is that BOQ rates are, as you said, sacrosanct. They are the fundamental financial DNA of your accepted tender.
Right. You priced it, you own it.
That's the baseline. However, standard contracts, including FIDIC Clause 12.3, do recognize that if the nature or the quantity of the work changes drastically, applying the old rate becomes commercially absurd.
So there is a mechanism.
Yes. Under FIDIC, a new rate can be negotiated if three specific conditions are met. First, the measured quantity of the item changes by more than 10%.
Okay, volume change.
Second, this change in quantity causes the cost per unit to change by more than 1%. And third, the item isn't specified in the contract as a fixed rate item.
Okay, but let's look at a real-world pressure cooker scenario here, where it's not just a simple quantity change, but a complete macroeconomic collapse.
Which happens more often than we'd like.
Yeah. Imagine you are building a state-of-the-art hospital project in Sri Lanka, or perhaps Egypt. It's a 5-year mega project.
Okay, I see where this is going.
In year 2, the country faces a massive economic crisis. The supply chain completely collapses, the currency is severely devalued, and inflation is running at like 60%.
A total nightmare scenario.
Exactly. And then the engineer issues a variation for a huge amount of extra earthworks and just tells the contractor, hey, just use the day work rates from your tender 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Right? How can any professional quantity surveyor justify holding a contractor to a financially ruinous day work rate that was priced in a totally different economic reality?
They can't. They cannot justify it ethically or practically.
Thank you.
If we anchor this in international surveying standards, like the RICS or AIQS competency standards, a professional has a duty to act fairly and reasonably.
Right, you can't just bankrupt a company on a technicality.
Exactly. In your hyperinflationary example, applying a 2-year-old day work rate for a newly instructed variation isn't just commercially punitive. It's practically unenforceable because it threatens the very delivery of the project by basically driving the contractor toward immediate insolvency.
So they just walk off the job.
They'd have to. This is where the mechanisms for creating new rates, or what we call star rates, become vital.
Okay, let's break down exactly how a star rate is built. Because it's not just picking a new higher number out of thin air to cover inflation, is it? It's a forensic buildup.
Highly forensic. A star rate is a completely new rate built entirely from scratch. You take the fair market prices for labor, materials, and plant at the exact time the variation is actually executed.
So you need real data.
Yes. You demand actual invoices, you need 3 comparative quotes for materials, and you pull current payroll data.
You prove the exact cost.
Right. And once you have that direct cost, you add a reasonable agreed-upon percentage for head office, overhead, and profit.
Makes total sense.
Experienced commercial professionals know that rigid adherence to an outdated BOQ rate during a fundamental shift in project conditions is just a fast track to project abandonment.
But I guarantee the employer will just sit there and argue, hey, you signed a fixed price contract. You took the risk of inflation. That's literally what a lump sum means.
And honestly, that is a perfectly valid legal argument regarding the original scope of works.
The original scope.
Yes, that is exactly why risk allocation is priced at tender. You are supposed to forecast inflation for the job you agreed to do.
But not for new stuff they add later.
Exactly. We must distinguish between general market fluctuation on the original scope and fundamental changes to the scope that are actively directed by the employer.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. If the extra earthworks are a variation, standard contracts dictate that if there is no applicable rate, a fair valuation must be made. You cannot use a day work schedule as a weapon.
Which brings us to a really critical development in the industry, I think. The FIDI Golden Principles of 2019.
Yes, specifically Part 2.
This is crucial for anyone negotiating contracts right now.
It is. FIDI published these golden principles to basically stop employers from completely destroying the balanced risk allocation of standard contracts through these wild bespoke amendments.
Just gutting the contract.
Right. And a core principle is that the contract must clearly state the duties, rights, and obligations of the parties. And fundamentally, it must maintain a fair balance of risk.
Which rewriting rates destroys.
Totally. Rewriting rates arbitrarily or stripping away a contractor's right to a fair valuation for changed work, it undermines the entire competitive tendering process.
Because if contractors know you'll do that, they just inflate the initial bid.
Exactly. If you force contractors to price unquantifiable macroeconomic risk on potential future variations, they will simply add massive risk premiums to their initial tenders. And the employer ultimately just pays way more upfront.
It also completely messes with provisional sums and prime cost sums, doesn't it?
Oh, completely.
Because just to recap for everyone, a provisional sum is basically a placeholder in the BOQ for work we know we need, but we don't really have the design details for yet.
Right, like landscaping or something.
Yeah. And a prime cost sum is usually for a specific nominated subcontractor or some specialized material. So if the market goes crazy, those sums become massive wildcards.
Absolutely. Commercial managers make a massive, massive mistake when they treat provisional sums as a fixed bucket of money or like a hard cap on expenditure.
It's not a cap.
No, it is merely an allowance. When an engineer issues an instruction to actually expend a provisional sum, it is essentially a variation.
Oh, interesting.
The work must be valued based on actual cost or agreed new rates at the time the instruction is actually given.
So if the market is doubled, the price doubles.
Exactly. If the original allowance was $1 million, but the current market rate to execute that newly finalized design is $2 million, the contract price is simply adjusted upward. The employer carries the price risk on provisional sums.
Okay, so if you are sitting in a risk reduction meeting tomorrow and the engineer tells you to execute a provisional sum using old day work rates, your immediate move must be to reject that valuation methodology in writing immediately and submit a star rate buildup.
Absolutely. Do not accept the old rates.
Okay, so we've talked extensively about valuing physical things, right? Materials, scope changes, earthworks. But let's move to evaluation of the invisible killer on site. Time.
The ultimate battleground.
Time is the most contested resource in construction. If the SCL protocol blocks a contractor from getting prolongation costs during certain delays, how do they navigate that? Let's step into the time trap: concurrency, float, and the critical path method.
This is where commercial relationships truly break down into just entrenched warfare.
I believe it. So let me play devil's advocate here on concurrent delay.
Okay, let's hear it.
Concurrent delay is when both the employer and the contractor cause delays simultaneously, right? And both affect the critical path.
Correct.
So if I, the contractor, finish my critical concrete pour a week late because my pump broke, but you, the employer, forgot to give me the site access for the next zone a week late anyway, aren't we just even?
It seems like it logically, doesn't it?
Right. Neither of us could progress. So why does this require a 500-page forensic claim from an absolute army of delay analysts?
Because in contract law, being even is a highly complex state to prove forensically.
Of course it is.
The complexity arises because time and money are treated entirely differently in concurrent delay scenarios. Let's actually unpack the SCL delay and disruption protocol here, which is widely recognized as international best practice for managing these specific disputes.
Right, the Society of Construction Law Protocol. But wait, if we look at the English Court of Appeal in cases like North Midland Building Ltd v. Sidon Homes Ltd, they basically said parties can agree to allocate concurrent delay risk however they want.
Yes, freedom of contract.
Right. If the bespoke contract says the contractor gets absolutely nothing in a concurrent delay, the courts will uphold that. So why do we treat the SCL protocol like it's some immutable law of physics?
That is an excellent pushback, and you are entirely correct regarding common law jurisdictions like England. Freedom of contract really does reign supreme there.
So the protocol doesn't matter if you signed it away.
If you sign a bespoke clause that negates your rights during concurrent delay, North Midland confirms you are bound by it. However, the SCL protocol remains the benchmark for unamended standard forms.
Okay, fair enough.
And it serves as incredibly persuasive guidance in international arbitration, particularly in civil code jurisdictions, where those mandatory provisions of good faith might actually override those punitive bespoke concurrency clauses.
Okay, so assuming we are following the SCL protocol standard, explain the exact logic to me of how time and money are decoupled. Why do I get the time, but not the money?
Okay, the general principle in the SCL protocol for true concurrent delay is that the contractor is entitled to an extension of time for the employer's delay, but they're not entitled to recover prolongation costs for that same period.
Just the time.
Just the time. You get the time because the employer hindered your ability to complete the project. The prevention principle dictates that an employer cannot benefit from their own breach by levying liquidated damages against you when they were actively holding you up.
That makes sense. But I don't get the money. I don't get the prolonged site overheads, the crane rentals, the project manager's salary.
Exactly, because you would have incurred those overheads anyway due to your own broken concrete pump.
Right.
You cannot prove that the employer's lack of site access caused your financial loss because your own failure was simultaneously causing the exact same loss.
So you don't get a windfall.
Exactly. You don't get a windfall. You don't get paid for sitting around if you were going to be sitting around regardless.
Man, this is where I see so many contracts engineers just shoot themselves in the foot.
All the time.
They win the massive technical argument on concurrency, they get the EOT approved, and then they just automatically submit a massive financial claim for those weeks.
And what happens?
The engineer immediately and correctly, based on what you're saying, rejects the financial claim, and then the contractor's management thinks they've been robbed.
It is the single most common commercial mistake in the industry, and this friction over time entitlement brings us to an even more contentious issue, honestly. Float.
Oh boy. Who actually owns the float?
Yes.
Let's define this clearly for a second. If I have a baseline program and I finish a non-critical activity 3 weeks early, I have 3 weeks of float.
Correct.
If the employer then delays that specific activity by 2 weeks, the project still finishes on time. Do they owe me anything? Or is float just a free buffer for whoever grabs it first?
The philosophical and legal battle over float ownership is legendary.
I can imagine.
There are generally 3 schools of thought. The project owns it, the contractor owns it, or the employer owns it. But the SCL protocol heavily favors the idea that the project owns the float.
The project itself.
Yes. This means that float is a shared resource that expires as the project progresses. It is not an asset you can just bank for later.
But the contractor will absolutely scream at this.
Oh, they do.
They will say, I created that float. I worked efficiently, I paid for double shifts to build a buffer for my own risks down the line, and the employer just stole it through their delayed drawing approvals.
Which is a totally understandable commercial frustration. I completely get it. But legally, an extension of time is granted specifically to extend the completion date.
A very end date.
Right. If the completion date isn't threatened because the delay only consumed available float on a non-critical path, there is simply no EOT to grant.
Because you're still finishing on time.
Exactly. This is why mastering the critical path method, or CPM, is vital. You cannot just look at a static Gantt chart on a wall.
Right, you need the software.
You have to run the dynamic logic of the program using software like Primavera P6 to see if the delay actually rippled through to the end date.
And whether you do a retrospective delay analysis, looking back at what actually happened, or a prospective analysis, looking forward at what was anticipated at the time of the delay, that can completely change the outcome of who used the float.
Exactly. It changes everything. And if the SCL protocol blocks a contractor from getting prolongation costs during a concurrent delay, or if the employer consumes all the float without penalty, where does the contractor hide those financial losses?
They usually try to camouflage them as disruption claims, don't they?
They certainly try.
So what does this all mean in practice? We are moving from delay, which is about the end date, to disruption, which is entirely about efficiency and productivity loss.
Yes, loss of productivity.
How does a commercial manager actually prove disruption forensically on a massive mixed-use development? You can't just send a bill to the employer saying, hey, you issued too many RFIs, so my guys were 20% less efficient, pay me.
No, you absolutely cannot. And this is where arbitration cases are won and lost. And it always comes down to one thing: empirical data.
Hard numbers.
Disruption claims are notoriously difficult to win because tribunals absolutely despise theoretical models.
They don't want estimates.
No, you cannot look at a textbook, see an academic study stating that out-of-sequence working causes a 15% drop in productivity, and then retroactively apply that percentage to your total labor cost.
That sounds like a global claim.
That is a classic global claim, and tribunals will strike it down instantly.
So how is a measured mile analysis actually mathematically executed then? Because everyone talks about the measured mile, but very few people seem to know how to actually plot it.
A measured mile analysis requires you to find a period on the actual project where the specific work, let's say pipe installation, was completely unhindered by the employer.
So a good period.
Yes. That is your baseline productivity. You map the exact number of man-hours spent against the exact linear meters of pipe installed in that specific period.
Okay, you have a clean baseline.
Then you find the period where the employer was late with the drawings or they were actively denying access. You measure the labor expended against the output during that disrupted period.
And the difference between the unhindered output and the disrupted output is your quantifiable loss.
Precisely. But here is the really critical part that people miss. You have to filter out contractor culpable delays.
Oh, right. You can't blame them for your own mistakes.
Exactly. If your productivity dropped, you have to prove it wasn't because your own tools broke or because you brought in an inexperienced crew that week.
And how do you prove that?
You can only prove this if your site team has been keeping meticulous daily allocations of labor hours against specific schedule activities.
Which, let's be brutally honest here, rarely happens on chaotic sites.
Yeah, it's extremely rare.
Foremen just write 10 guys on level 4. They don't write 4 guys waiting 3 hours for structural steel RFI response, 6 guys actively welding.
No, they don't have the time or the training usually.
And without that granular data, your disruption claim is just an expensive piece of fiction.
Exactly. It will fail. Now, what happens when the employer causes these delays, denies your legitimate EOT, and still demands you finish on the original contractual date?
Oh, that's constructive acceleration.
Yes. The contractor is basically forced to pour immense resources, overtime, extra shifts, faster plant, weekend working into the project just to overcome the employer's delay and avoid liquidated damages.
It's a huge gamble.
It is a high-stakes commercial gamble because the contractor is spending hard cash up front in the hope of proving years later in arbitration that they were entitled to the EOT they were denied.
And therefore, the acceleration was constructive and basically ordered by the employer's refusal to grant time. It's essentially mitigating the employer's risk using the contractor's checkbook.
Very well put.
Let's talk about the math of prolongation costs, specifically head office overheads. Because when a project is delayed by 6 months, the direct site costs are pretty obvious, right? The crane rental, the site cabins.
Right, the preliminaries.
But back at headquarters, the CEO, the HR department, the rent for the corporate office,
Yeah.
those costs are still ticking.
They never stop.
And they were supposed to be paid for by a new project that this team hasn't been able to move to yet because they are stuck on the delayed project.
Exactly.
This is where we always hear about these legendary formulas, Hudson, Emden, and Eichley.
A masterclass in commercial claims just isn't complete without them.
Right. So why formulas?
These formulas exist to mathematically allocate a portion of the company's total unabsorbed head office overheads to the specific delayed project. Because you cannot produce a direct invoice for a fraction of the CEO's salary, you have to use a mathematical formula.
Okay, let's start with Hudson. I've always found the Hudson formula to be a bit of a commercial trap.
It definitely is.
Because if a contractor tendered a wildly optimistic 15% margin just to win the job, Hudson actually rewards them for that lie during a delay. How do tribunals not see right through that?
Oh, tribunals do see through it, which is exactly why the Hudson formula is the most heavily criticized and frequently rejected formula in modern arbitration.
Because it uses the tender numbers.
Yes. Hudson uses the head office overhead and profit percentage stated in the original tender. It assumes that whatever margin you hope to make at the start is the exact rate you are bleeding during the delay.
Which is never true.
Almost never. As you said, if you inflated your tender margin, Hudson gives you a massive windfall. It relies on a theoretical estimate, not empirical reality.
Which is exactly why the Emden formula was developed.
Correct. Emden is similar in structure, but instead of using the tender percentage, it requires the contractor to present their actual audited company accounts.
Real numbers.
Yes. You determine the true average head office overhead percentage across the whole business for that specific financial year.
That makes so much more sense.
It is much more realistic and widely accepted in international arbitration, particularly under English law and in the GCC, because it is rooted in actual audited expenditure.
And then there is Eichley.
Ah, Eichley.
It takes a completely different approach, doesn't it? It looks at the total billings of the delayed project relative to the company's total billings across all projects during the specific delayed period.
Yes, a ratio based on billings.
It uses that ratio to calculate a daily allocable overhead rate, which is then multiplied by the days of delay. Mathematically, it sounds incredibly precise, but tribunals in the GCC are increasingly rejecting it. Why?
Because To use ICLEI, you must prove you were on standby.
Standby, what does that mean legally?
Proving standby is exceptionally difficult. It basically means three things. One, the delay was of an indefinite duration. The employer didn't say, we are pausing for exactly 6 months. They kept you hanging week by week. Two, you had to be ready to resume work immediately when called upon, meaning you couldn't demobilize your heavy equipment or reassign your key personnel to other sites.
You had to keep them there just waiting.
Right. And three, because of that uncertainty, you were genuinely unable to take on replacement work to absorb those overheads.
So if you knew you were going to be delayed for a solid year, tribunals argue you should have mitigated your loss by finding another job to pay the rent at HQ.
Exactly.
You weren't on standby. You were just idle.
Exactly. If you are sitting in a risk reduction meeting tomorrow and you realize the employer's suspension is going to be indefinite, your immediate move must be to formally document that you are holding resources in readiness and cannot redeploy them.
Get it in writing.
Yes. Without proving standby, your ICLEI calculation will be thrown out instantly. But again, I have to stress this. All these formulas are entirely useless without a proven entitlement to an EOT in the first place.
Right, you have to win the time argument first. So we've covered the complexities of force majeure, the Sharia principles protecting against omitted scope, the forensic reality of disruption and concurrency, and the strict proofs required for overhead formulas.
It's a lot to process.
It really is.
Yeah.
But what happens when the employer and contractor simply cannot agree on any of this? Like the final account is completely deadlocked.
Then we enter the final phase.
This brings us to the final escalation, the dispute arena.
This is where the project ceases to be a construction endeavor and becomes a purely legal battleground.
Let's look at the progression. Modern contracts try to stop things from going nuclear immediately, right?
Yeah.
Like the NEC contract, the new engineering contract. It is famous for its proactive early warning ethos.
It is. The NEC is built on a fundamental philosophy of mutual trust and cooperation.
Which sounds nice in theory.
Well, it mandates early warning notices. The moment either party foresees a risk that could increase cost, delay the works, or impair performance, they must notify the other and hold a risk reduction meeting.
So you can't just hide the problem.
No. The goal is dispute avoidance. It forces the parties to solve the problem collaboratively in real time. In fact, if a contractor fails to give an early warning under the NEC, they can actually be penalized in the valuation of that specific compensation event.
Wow, okay. Contrast that with the traditional adversarial structures of the JCT or bespoke GCC contracts.
It's night and day.
In heavily amended GCC contracts, communication often happens exclusively through formal, defensive claims rather than collaborative problem solving.
Everyone is just building their case from day one.
Right. A problem occurs. The contractor builds a massive 500-page claim in isolation. The engineer takes 84 days to review it and then rejects it in a single paragraph.
Yeah.
And suddenly you are escalating.
And what does that escalation ladder look like?
Well, it usually starts with adjudication, right? Adjudication is designed to be a rapid interim fix. A neutral third party makes a binding decision within roughly 28 days to keep the cash flowing.
Exactly. It's pay now, argue later.
Then you have dispute boards. FAI heavily promotes the Dispute Avoidance and Adjudication Board.
Yes, the DAI is crucial.
These are panels of experts appointed at the start of the project. They visit the site regularly, they know the personalities, they understand the technical issues, and they can offer informal assistance to prevent disputes before they crystallize.
They are fantastic for keeping projects moving. But if someone issues a notice of dissatisfaction against a DAB decision, we are heading to arbitration.
And that's where the big guns come out.
Oh, absolutely. Liquidated damages are on the table, delay damages are levied, and the expert witnesses are called to the stand.
It's intense.
The high-pressure environment of expert witness practice is something very few professionals truly master.
I've seen it happen in arbitration hearings. The barrister doesn't attack the complex math of the disruption claim first. They attack the input data.
Always attack the data.
They pull up a single timesheet from a Tuesday in November, show that the expert assumed 10 men were working when the site diary clearly says only 4 were, and suddenly the expert's entire 500-page report is treated as complete fiction by the tribunal.
It crumbles instantly.
When you are acting as an expert witness yourself, what is the single biggest mistake you see experienced claims consultants make when they get under cross-examination?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, credibility is everything. The absolute biggest mistake is a lack of independence.
Independence from the client.
Yes. An expert witness's overriding duty is to the tribunal, not to the client who is paying their bill.
But they forget that.
They do. I have seen highly experienced project directors get on the stand and basically act as advocates for their company.
Defending the claim at all costs.
Right. They over-exaggerate the claims, they ignore evidence that hurts their case, they try to argue legal points instead of sticking to their technical discipline. And under rigorous cross-examination by a skilled barrister, their methodology just collapses.
Because they look biased. And they lose the tribunal's trust.
Completely. And once the tribunal stops trusting the expert's impartiality, the client's case is essentially dead. Exactly. A great expert witness must be entirely impartial. If there's a weakness in the contractor's delay analysis, or if a specific concurrent delay actually negates a portion of the financial claim, the expert must proactively acknowledge it.
Even if it hurts the client's bottom line.
Especially then. The moment a tribunal detects bias, they discard that expert's entire report. And let me tell you, poorly negotiated commercial closeouts where parties dig their heels in over small amounts, refuse to compromise, and end up spending millions on legal fees and arbitration, they destroy immense commercial value.
It's just a waste of money.
It is. The best dispute resolution strategy is, and always will be, dispute avoidance.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really did.
From the stringent requirements of force majeure as a structural firewall in GCC crises, to the absolute commercial warfare over omitted works, Sharia good faith principles, and the forensic buildup of star rates.
A full masterclass.
We navigated the time trap of concurrent delay. We broke down why tribunals reject the Eichley formula without proof of standby, and we stepped into the high-stakes arena of expert witnesses under cross-examination.
It is a phenomenal landscape to navigate. It requires a deep synthesis of legal principles, commercial acumen, and practical, on-the-ground project experience.
Hopefully you feel like you've just walked out of a premium executive training session. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've talked extensively today about the vital importance of contemporary records, how empirical data wins disruption claims, how the SEL protocol relies on hard facts, and how barristers destroy experts over faulty timesheets.
The paperwork is everything.
But as our mega projects grow larger and profit margins grow ever thinner, consider this.
It's an important horizon to look toward.
If human error in record keeping, like that foreman scribbling on a timesheet in the desert, is the #1 cause of failed claims, how long before we rely entirely on automated real-time data harvesting?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Imagine drones conducting daily volumetric analysis of earthworks, AI interpreting baseline productivity, and biometric tracking, calculating our MDIN formulas automatically based on exact worker locations.
It would completely eliminate the human error in the data.
Right. Are we moving toward a future where human professional judgment is removed from commercial management and delay analysis altogether? It's a wild thought.
It really is. Something to think about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the realities of complex commercial management. We'll catch you on the next one.